In the last tutorial, we talked about processing reverb. Processing reverb is not the easiest thing in the world, and it's not going to work for every single track. You really almost have to go track by track basis, reverb by reverb basis when you're making those decisions, and you have to make them in context because it's very easy to make an adjustment and have it not work at all. Now, in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about processing delays. And with processing delays, this is so much more common. And even in many genres of music, I would dare say it's a requirement if you want to get, the diversity of sounds that you're going for. And it's also just a lot easier to do. With processing delays, you can save these as presets, the chains that we create. So you're just kind of making a new delay effect entirely. And you can use that project to project. And it almost always works, and it sounds cool. Processing reverb, a little bit more weary of that because it's not going to work for every single situation. So one of the main ideas in this tutorial is that by combining traditional and experimental techniques, you'll be able to create an endless array of unique delay effects. And that's kind of the key word here in this tutorial are unique delays, because how you choose to process delay is entirely up to you. There are no rules. You can do anything you want. It can be very subtle or it can be extreme. And we'll be looking at a number of examples throughout the tutorial. The techniques shown can be applied in any DAW with any variety of plugins that you may have. You don't need to go out of your way and buy a specialty delay if you don't want to. Using what you have bundled in your DAW right now will allow you to do what that second bullet says, which is create an endless array of delay effects. Delay setup, not that much different from reverb setup in terms of what we need to do for this tutorial, which is the third bullet down. You need to make sure that you can isolate the delay separate from the dry signal so that we're only processing the delay. Now with reverb, it's commonly set up in a send and return fashion because you might be sending multiple parts into that same reverb. However, with delay, and specifically in this tutorial, we're really focused on creating unique delays for each and every part that we might be working with. So while you can set things up in a send and return fashion, it may not always be appropriate. And in our situation here, it's not going to be appropriate. So I'll probably set things up, and we'll look at some examples in a second. I'll probably set things up where we have everything saved onto one track, everything located on that one track. So just working with layers, just because for me it's a little bit easier organization-wise to keep everything together and to set that blend. But if you want to set things up send return, that's totally fine. There's always more than one way to accomplish anything in the digital audio workstation. One other point to make quickly is that signal flow can make a big difference when it comes to processing delay, but not as big as of a difference as it did when we were talking about reverb, where that was really the focus. That was one of the main bullet points and conclusions at the end of that tutorial. With delay, it matters, but it doesn't matter all the time. So for a lot of the examples, you'll see me putting the effects post-delay, so after the delay, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can also experiment with putting them before and hearing if there's a difference or if there isn't a difference, and a lot of times there won't be. When signal flow does matter, we will be sure to point that out and really explain why it makes a difference. So there will be a few reasons or a few situations where it matters, but most of the time you can be a little bit more lenient with that and just kind of throw things around wherever, because again, a lot of times it will end up sounding cool and it will end up working even if you don't know 100% what it is you're going for at the start. We're going to start by just reviewing the basic setup and configuration of the delay for our purposes in this tutorial. And much like reverb, what we really have to do is make sure that we're isolating that delay separate from the dry signal so that we're able to process the delayed version independent of whatever we have on the track. So one way we could go about doing this is the same thing that we tended to do with the reverb, and that is in more of the send return configuration. So we can create our return track here, and I'm going to call this mix delay. And the reason I would go with the send and return configuration is because I want to send multiple parts into that same effect. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to grab a delay. And by default here, it sets it all the way to 100% wet. What I want to do first is just make sure I'm setting this up as a straight delay. So by setting this up as a straight delay, I just have that one repeat, aka 0 feedback. I'm not using these filters at all. The mix is 100% wet. And in this particular delay plugin, what you have with these numbers is indicating 1/16 or 2/16, aka an eighth note, 4/16, a quarter note. And if I choose 16, it's a whole note. And if I wanted to go longer than just a whole note, I could actually jerry chain these guys together, have a 16th note here and then a quarter note, which would be a whole note plus a quarter note. Not that important. That's just kind of one of the small things to note about this particular plugin. But now we have this guy set up. I'll set it to an eighth note. I can go over here and I can send into this delay.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And then as it comes around to the synth part, I can do the exact same thing, send in. And so there you have it. This is a perfect straight delay. It's just coming out a lot quieter. Okay, so that actually in and of itself does not make it a straight delay. The fact that it's quieter in volume is a difference between the original and the delayed version. And then if we wanted, we could add some kind of an effect here at the end. So let's use an effect that's pretty easy to hear. We'll go and grab like a flanger, for example. And now if we just solo out the delayed part.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
You can hear how we're just processing that delayed version with the flange. We can actually make this a little bit more interesting by adding more feedback. So something like that. Now, the issue with setting up the send and return, and this is actually a big issue once you start to get into projects that have a ton of tracks that are taking up a lot of space left to right or top to bottom, is that it starts to get a little bit cluttered, because normally when we're working with delays, and specifically for this tutorial, we're really focused on creating unique delays. So I'd want a particular delay for this polysynth part and a particular delay for this voice that are different. They are processed differently. The times are different amounts of feedback, even potentially different delay plugins are going to go on these different tracks. And so to do that, we can set things up in a couple of different ways. The common way that you might do this in your DAW would be to create an additional audio track, and specifically we're going to duplicate this audio track, group them together, and here's where the organization comes into play, because I can always fold this up. And then with this version, I'm going to call this the delayed version, okay? And so all I have to do now is go in, grab my delay, set this to 100%, just like we did in the send return. So this is just the delay isolated. Bring back down the feedback, create more of a straight delay, and now you'll hear
they are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Now we have a literal straight delay because the volume is exactly the same from this original to the delay, and I could just mix it accordingly.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Okay, so very simple. We could close this then up. We leave a lot of space and we keep our returns just for our reverbs. Now, that's the way I like to do it, and that's really specific to certain genres and styles of music where you have a ton of tracks going down. It keeps things nice and organized, nice and clean. But if we want to take that even a step further, and this is something that you may not have in your DAW, so don't freak out if you don't. You can still achieve this effect by doing what I just showed you or using the send and return configuration, is to go in here and actually use layers. So layers is exactly the same thing as you just saw me do, only now we can keep this isolated to one track. So if I play back, I'm hearing nothing, and that's because we don't have any layers here. But I can go in and I can add a tool device, and that just gives me, whoops, let's redo that. This just gives me the traditional dry version.
They are not there now.
Nothing has changed. I can even get rid of that tool.
They are not there now in the evening.
And then I can go in here and I can add my delay as a separate chain. And again, I'm going to set this to 100% wet so that I can isolate the delay.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And what makes this so cool is that I could actually duplicate this chain. So I'm just going to option click it down. And with this version, I'm going to set a different time, and then I can adjust the pans. So
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And then I could go in and I could process each of these guys individually. So sometimes people ask questions about how do you actually do things? Like, how do I set it up? This would actually be the way that I probably would set it up. Now, understand that this is the comfortable way for me. It may not be the comfortable way for you. So you need to find what really works best for you personally in the way that you make music. If this seems complicated, confusing, or just not logical to you, then don't set it up. If your DAW doesn't offer it, clearly you can't set it up this way. But chances are we will be working in this fashion just to keep things very organized, very clean. And so you do get a better sense of maybe the way I actually set things up in context. Types of delay. Believe it or not, we can actually boil down delay into two very broad categories. Obviously, it goes deeper than that when you start to say, okay, well, here's a traditional delay, but it's capable of this, 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 and this. But really, delay is very simple to understand. And when we look at the examples, you'll be like, wow, delay is really easy. And it is really easy, especially for this tutorial. So one main type of delay is the traditional delay. Okay, so in this case, you might have one or two delay lines and you have a variable feedback. Variable feedback just meaning that more feedback equals more repeats. And then each delay line, you just set the time individually. So if it's one delay line, all you have to worry about is setting the time and then setting the feedback. And just like that, there's your delay. And if you really don't even understand what delay is at this point, which I'm sure you all do, it's just an echo. So you have your original signal and it repeats. And what we'll be focusing on is, of course, then the processing of those delays, so making it sound different, the beyond just volume, which of course is fading out. The other type of delay are what we call taps. Okay, so with taps, you have multiple delay lines, oftentimes 4, 5, 6 different independent delay lines. And you normally set this up so that there's just one repeat. So the feedback is at 0. You could go in and alter that a little bit if you want. But normally a tap delay is used if you need to get a very particular type of emphasis. So you know that you want 3 repeats and you want them to happen in a particular like rhythmic pattern. So you want the first one to happen a quarter note, the following one to happen a quarter note plus an eighth note later, and the last one to happen, one bar different. And maybe each of those then you want to process independently. So that's really the joy and beauty of working with taps. The other big category of delay effect is the granular delay, and we're not going to be covering that in this tutorial. That really has a mind of its own and is more of a sound design effect, and you can use it to create some amazing, diverse, crazy, fun sounds, and I'm sure it's something we'll be talking about in future tutorials. One thing to note, and one thing I will show you, is that you can set up taps. You can set up a tap delay with multiple instances of a traditional delay if you do not have a tap delay already included with your DAW. So don't worry, it's always easy to emulate these things, and that's really the joy and beauty of working in the computer, is that it's so flexible and easy to set these things up if you don't have them already. With all the fancy delay plugins out there, it's easy to think that there's a lot to learn or that there are a lot of variations on what the delay is. But fundamentally, the delay itself can be broken down into two broad categories: the typical traditional delay and the tap delay. Of course, there are also things like granular delays and delay clouds and things of that nature, which we're not going to be dealing with in this tutorial, something that I'm sure we'll talk about down the road, more of like experimental soundscape devices and techniques you can use. But for now, this entire chain that I have here, 2 free plugins and 2 plugins that come bundled with my DAW, all fall into the traditional delay category. And what I mean by traditional delay is that we have the ability to set a delay time, we can set the feedback, how many repeats, and we can choose the balance of that delay to the original. So if I start with this first one,
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
We have that straight delay like so, okay? So there's nothing really that unique or special about this. If I want more feedback,
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
I just increase the amount of feedback. And built into this is an additional filter, but we can really imagine that this is gone because we can always add a filter on our own, which is why it's not even doing anything in this context. So we can go now and look at the delay 2. So with the delay 2, we have pretty much the same thing, only now we have 2 different versions. And we can even adjust the input. Now this is a mono signal, so I can just change this to mono here, have these set at the same time, width is down to 0. So we basically converted this into just one delay line.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So nothing really different with how we've set this up. However, this is really designed to be a little bit more of like or it can be used as kind of like a ping pong delay, but really what it is, 2 separate delay lines here. Delay line 1, delay line 2. And if we put these to be different values, you'll hear like so.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
It's the equivalent to us just having 2 delays going in a row, and then I can increase the width, and that will then spread these out, so left and right.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So like a basic ping pong delay, but nothing really different in terms of comparing this delay 2 to this delay 1. All we've done is just increase the number of delays. That's pretty much it. We have a feedback. We have a cross feed if we want to actually have feedback dictated by what's going on in the left versus the right. Nothing too fancy. Really basically the same as the regular delay. We go in and we look at this plugin delay. I know the interface is kind of hard to see, but it's the same basic idea. We can sync this to tempo here. And let's just put this up to an 8th note. Let's check out where the dry wet is.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And right now we have it stereo, so we have one delay that's going at an 8th note, the other delay is going at 64th note. We can link them.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
We have our feedback control.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And we can go ping pong style.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So again, not a whole lot different to what we've just been looking at. If we want to get a little bit fancier here and we want to try to emulate what we've just been working on, instead of using width, we can actually manually adjust the pan position of each of these delay lines independently. So let's have this one be a 1/4 note, this one be an 8th note.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
We can start to bring them in.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And you can see where this is corresponding on this graphic up here.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
So if we want them both off to the left, we can actually set that up in here, which we can't really do with this other version here. And again, we just have a built-in filter. Nothing fancy, nothing over the top. And last but not least, we look at this Valhalla delay. Same idea. We have a feedback control. We have our mix. We can choose our delay time. We can sync it if we want.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Open that up like so. Now this one has a specialty feature, which we'll be getting to a little bit later on. But all of these delays are doing the exact same thing to the signal, plus a couple of added processing adjustments. So I have the filters in a lot of these examples. And in this one, I have a shift control, and I also have filters. The other type of delay that we can look at is the tap delay. And with the tap delay, what you actually have is the ability to control more than maybe just 2 delay lines, and you get a lot more advanced features. So this delay 4 is a tap delay, and each of these is a different delay, and we can actually control the sound going in with effects or the feedback effects themselves, depending on how much feedback we've set. So right now we just have our one delay in.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And we can even control the volume and the pan of each of these individually. So this is really where the power is. It's in the ability to control the volume, because normally with feedback, it fades out slowly. But let's say that we want something to first trigger at an 8th note, then a 1/4 note, but we want the 1/4 note to be louder. So I can easily set that up.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So the second hit is actually louder than the first one, and that's not something that you would expect with a traditional delay if you're using just regular feedback.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And what's so awesome about this plugin is that we can actually process our sounds either coming in or going out. So I can go and I can make the first one have a chorus effect on it. And on the second one, I could have this be like a comb, and then you get that variation.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
We'll just put it to 100% so we can hear the difference in the delay lines.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So something like that is so easy to set up with a tap delay, and you get much better fine-tuned control. And we can still increase the amount of feedback, and it's actually very interesting. We can use the other delay lines to trigger more feedback in a different one. But for the most part, you'd probably just stick to the delay itself. So with number
They
one,
are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So if you were unable to hear the feedback before, I went ahead and just really junked it up. So the last thing that you can do if you do not have a tap delay, but you need that effect, which sometimes you do need that tap delay effect, is you can always go and set things up either through layers or in a parallel configuration using your traditional delay. So let's just do it in the classic parallel configuration. We'll duplicate this 2 times, and this will be delay 1. This will be delay 2. We'll group it all together here. And then with delay 1, we'll go ahead and set these up individually. We'll have this time being an 8th note.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Okay, so we've got that first one going. Make sure you put that to 100%.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And we can go ahead and we can pan this one off to the left.
They are not there now in the evening.
And then with delay number 2, we're going to still use the delay 1 device, obviously, but we'll set a different time. So we'll have this be a quarter note. Pan this off to the right.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
And then again, we could go in here and we could process these individually.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So something like that is very easy to set up and then still close down. Or the opposite thing you could do, or I should just say another thing you could do, is go in here and use layers, and you could emulate that exact same behavior. So since you've already seen that done, I'll just very quickly give you guys the layout for that. Would be to go in here, add a tool device, which is going to be your dry signal, and then you just bring in a couple of different instances of delay. So your DAW may not have this functionality, which is fine, but there you go. You have that set up like so. You just bring the feedback down, do whatever you want to do. So those are the differences and 2 different types of delay and how you might go about setting them up and some of the different sound possibilities that exist within them. We all know them. We all love them. The fancy delay plugins that are out there on the market, ranging anywhere from $100 to $250. It's amazing that so many plugins have been made that are dedicated to delay. And we just looked at that previous slide where delay is really not that difficult of an effect. So I did just want to make a couple of points about this. There are some great fancy delay plugins on the market. We all know that. If you don't know that, don't go out and start searching them out immediately because there's a lot you can do with what you have built in. And the reason I say that is because most of the added features in these delays, in these third-party delays, are additional effects or coloring options that just happen to come built in. And that's what the point of this tutorial is. It's about processing delay. And we're doing it in a manual fashion. But these fancy plugins normally have a lot of that built in. So there might be a chorus built into the delay. Ooh, right? So now you're taking the delayed signal and you're adding a chorus to it. But wait a minute, why can't we set that up ourselves? We absolutely can set that up ourselves. Or maybe it has a saturation. Wait a minute, we can do saturation ourselves too. So it's sort of like they have sometimes very specific reasons and specific purposes, or they're emulating a type of hardware. But for the most part, we can create our own unique delays without having to break the bank. So as I wrote here in these following 2 bullets, some of these specialty effects can be emulated with your stock delay in combination with bundled cheap or free tools. Will you be able to get that exact sound that you hear on the fancy plugin? Absolutely not. And so if you need that sound, I would definitely say go out and invest in one of these fancier delay plugins. But if you're willing to just kind of be experimental, you don't really know what the sound is you're going for, no reason to go out and purchase one of these things until you really have a reason to do so. Emulating classic hardware, okay, something like the Roland Space Echo or a particular type of tape delay is a little bit more difficult and something that we really can't do perfectly, but we can create our own unique vintage delays if we want to go down that road and try to get a little bit of that vibe. So just a word on the fancier plugins out there. They're all fantastic. They do great things, but we can create our own unique delays too without having to invest in another plugin, especially if we don't have the means or the resources of purchasing one of these. If you're more of a music creator or a music producer, you probably have more synth plugins than you do effect plugins. If you're a mix engineer, it usually works the opposite way, where you probably don't have any synthesizers, but you do have a lot of different insert effects. But one thing that we often overlook, especially as music producers or creators, is that some of the synths we buy actually do come bundled with a dedicated like effects bundle. And that can then be used as an insert. It's a new trend in the music plugin world, synthesizer plugins, but it is a great trend because it gives us a lot of bang for our buck. So if in that if in that effects suite is a delay, you guessed it, we can now configure it and have it work like a specialty delay plugin. So kind of like a secret weapon. And most people aren't going to use these effects bundles for that purpose. There might be like a really cool effect that you like. For example, I think FM8 has a couple of really kind of characteristic defining effects, and people really wanted to just use them on their sounds beyond FM8, so they released, the effects version. But within there's also some delay plugins, so you could use the delays and really kind of put those to 100% wet and then isolate them, work with the other effects that come bundled, or even work with the effects that you have. Lucky for us, signal flow isn't as important. So just because you maybe can't go in there and adjust the signal flow of the effects, as long as that delay is 100% wet, that's really all you need. And then from there, you can experiment and tweak and, just kind of set things to taste. So don't overlook that. Definitely something to be aware of if you have purchased some synthesizers, or if you're in the market for a synthesizer, you might want to look and see if they have a bundle of the effects included. I just wanted to show you one quick example of how you can use a effects bundle from a synthesizer really more as a specialty delay processor, and it's something people oftentimes overlook. If you don't have any synthesizers that have a specialty effects bundle, don't worry about it. By no means is this a requirement. You can still get incredibly diverse sounds without having to buy a synthesizer that comes with a bundle like this. It's not a requirement. I just wanted to show you in case you weren't familiar with how you could do this. So I've already set up the basic signal flow. We have our dry signal path, and then we have the delay version. On the delay version, we have our serum effects. So if I played this back now with no effects going, it's just going to be the signal louder. But I can go in here and we can see that I have all of these different effects I can use. So I see there's a delay. I can turn that on, bring that to the top. Not that it necessarily has to be at the top. You could always experiment with that. Just take the mix, bring it up to 100%. Let's turn on ping pong, use a little bit of this filtering, and now listen. It's kind of a little bit too much feedback, but I'm happy enough with that. And now I could go in and I could get kind of experimental. So I could bring in like a distortion. And this is specific to the delay signal. So we can just solo that out and just work with it a little bit. Cool, I'm happy with that. We can bring back in the original. So there you go, a unique delay that we were able to make in just a couple of minutes by using one of these specialty bundles that come with software synthesizers. For the rest of this tutorial, we'll be sticking to tools that you all have access to, whether it's the built-in tools that come bundled with your DAW or freeware. So this was the one exception, but we will be going back now and sticking to what we all have access to. Finally, we can get into our different delay processing techniques, beginning with the straight delay. The straight delay is arguably the most striking, the most impactful, the most shocking of all the delay effects out there. And how do you set up the straight delay? You do absolutely no processing. I'm leaving silence for impact. It sounds crazy, but it's true. If you think about nature, delay is no more than an offshoot of a natural acoustic phenomena. Echoes. You scream into the Grand Canyon, you hear those echoes come back, but do those echoes ever come back sounding exactly the same as just your voice going out into that space? The answer is no, and that's because echoes really only exist, and I should say audible echoes, in a very large space. So you're getting this really colored sound coming back. A lot of it has to do with reverb, but nowhere in nature will you hear a straight delay, and therefore when you use a straight delay in a production, it's a very striking effect. It's very powerful. It gives a lot of emphasis to whatever it is that's being delayed. And so I wrote here, typically the straight delay is used to give a word or a final note in a part particular emphasis. And this is more in line with what we call delay throws, so where you automate the mix amount on the delay just for those important moments. And we're actually going to be covering that topic in depth in the next tutorial. So we're not going to do a lot with straight delays here or even automating parameters on our delay, but don't worry, we will be getting to that in the next tutorial. Now, rarely, but not, there's always exceptions to rules, but rarely would you have a straight delay audible for an entire part going constantly, for example, on a synthesizer or a guitar, because it can have the tendency of really being overwhelming and in some cases almost distracting from the part itself. Now, when you go and you process the delay, it doesn't have to be extreme. So don't think that you can't have something that sounds very similar to the original. You absolutely can. But the full-blown straight delay, you have to kind of pick your spots with it because it can be a little bit unnerving. It can be a little bit confusing to the listener. That being said, if that's the effect you're going for, by all means, use it. When I refer to the straight delay technique, I am literally meaning a perfect repeat of the original signal. So it would be the same thing as duplicating this part and just taking this and slightly moving it over. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're not changing anything else, not even the volume. And this is why this is such a striking effect, because it's something that you would never expect or anticipate in nature. So right now we have this set up. Let's go ahead and just turn this mix to 100% and listen to what's going on in the delay versus the dry version. So even just that part there actually works quite well, but this isn't a straight delay, at least not yet. A straight delay or straight repeat would require us to take the feedback all the way off and to open up these filters entirely, so we're getting a perfect repeat. The volume is the same. And And this might work, but we have those moments of kind of blurring where it's coming together and actually creating more of a harmony and not always a very consonant harmony. So we could maybe get lucky and try to set a manual delay time or try to find something that works nicely. But overall, I think if you had to listen to this being repeated again and again with this straight delay, it could be a little bit unnerving. Now, I think at this time value, it works quite well. But even so, it's a little bit strange. It's not something that you really would expect to hear. That being said, you can always experiment with it. The main usage of a straight delay or just a straight repeat, a pure echo, would be with a delay throw. And all of next week's tutorial is going to be dedicated to delay throws. I thought I'd also just mention that something like a straight delay can work very well on, say, a vocal. So
they are not there now. They are not there now in the morning or noon. Morning or noon, not there.
And your instinct this entire time is to turn down the volume. But once you start to turn down the volume, it's no longer a straight delay anymore. It's actually changing. If you think about those equal loudness curves, the Fletcher-Munson curves, by turning this volume down, just making it quieter, and your perception of the signal is then going to change. So we don't even have to use the filters. Not only that, but changing volume is a massive difference in a delay. This gives us a much more natural feel.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there, not there.
And at this point, it's no longer a straight delay. It's a delay that has been affected in some way, even if it's just the volume being turned down. So experiment with the straight delay. See if you can find a really good application for it. And if you do, definitely let us know about it. So I might have lied to you just a little bit about the straight delay. And that's because the straight delay is often used in combination with what I call the short delay. So depending on how you define delay, I like to define it as something that I can like audibly hear. So I hear the first version and then like a repeat of it, and I kind of count the short delays in their own little category, but it's still a delay effect. So one exception to the infrequent use of the straight delay is the short delay. If you have a short enough delay time, you can actually get it so that the original signal that's being delayed blends with the delay, so you just perceive one sound. And this is the basis for a number of effects that you use every day. The chorus, the flanger, a lot of other stereo widening effects, all are based on this very simple basic acoustic phenomena, which is, I believe, referred to as the precedence effect or the Haas effect. This one little theory, which is, a true theory when you apply it into the computer and the digital audio workstation, has been used just countless of times, and it's used countless times every single day. And in this application, it's a little bit uncommon to see people process the delays any further. It does happen with dedicated plugins. So there are some like stereo widening effects or even like chorus effects that are more than just that basic chorus or more than just that basic short delay. They have a little bit more going on underneath the hood there. But of course, when you set it up yourself, you don't have to apply additional effects, but you always can. And I kind of recommend that you do, because you can really create your own unique stereo widening effects that other people are not going to be able to have access to. They have no idea how you set the thing up. So I recommend that if you are working with short delays, and we'll have a couple of examples of this, that you go and you even process them maybe a little bit further and just see what kind of sounds that you're able to come up with. The short delay is obviously the clear exception to the rule about working with straight delays. You can still go in and process these delayed versions further, but you don't necessarily have to get the desired effect. So we have here a mono signal, which is just this voice.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
We have our layer on here as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the delay 2, because the more delays that you have and the more variation that you have, the better. So the delay 2 gives me 2 independent delay lines that I can also spread the width on. So I'm just going to go ahead, bring that in. I'll go ahead and change these inputs to mono since it doesn't really make a difference. And now to access the short delay time, I need to go in here and select this so I can get into this manual option. So I'll just put both of them down to the fastest. And now I'm going to go ahead and set up this straight delay. So get rid of all the feedback. I'm not going to mess with any of the detune settings here. We'll open up these filters all the way, bring the width all the way down to 0, put the mix up to 100%, and now we should hear already quite a big difference.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And now we can start to change these two, so make one independent of the other. Right now we don't have any width, but once we do have width, we'll know that the shorter version, this 10 millisecond version, is going to be going to the left, and whatever we set here is going to be going to the right. So we'll just set this at around like 15.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And now we'll start to increase the width.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon,
so
not
mono,
there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
Into this very wide stereo effect. And we could then go in here and process this guy just a little bit further if we wanted to use something like an EQ or even like the filter. I might go in here and actually get rid of some of the low end.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Something
they
like
are
that.
Not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
And now we can just set a balance.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening.
That clicking noise is kind of annoying.
They are not there now in the. They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not there.
It's actually always there. I just didn't notice it until now. Anyway, this would be a technique you could use. You could get this blend set up then, and you'll notice that.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
You get this great little widening effect that actually almost puts this now into a space. And you don't even have to use reverb to do this. You can just use these very quick delay times and free up a lot of room for reverb for maybe other parts, if it's needed. So experiment with this on all sorts of devices. I could go ahead and I could put this on the polysynth as well.
They are not.
And we can listen to what it does. Not as big of a difference because this is already a stereo signal, and this is why you would tend to do something like this more so on these mono parts.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
From this point forward, we're going to be talking about audible delays. So you hear the original, and then you hear the delayed version. And as I just stated, I do highly recommend that you spend a lot of time messing around with short delays because it's a very popular technique used all the time, maybe sometimes even exploited or overused. But mess around with that and see what kind of new spatial effects you're able to create. If you want to get fancy, you can always combine a bunch of different short delays together, process each a little bit differently, and see what happens. The basic filtered delay. This is the most common effect you see paired with delay. And it's so common that it might be built right into the stock delay that you're working with. And you would use these filters for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is to cut out any low end from the duplicate. And this is something that we always come back to, this like fear of clouding your mix with a lot of low end gunk, or really with having low end hitting each other. That's kind of the bigger problem, is that it's more easy for those things to kind of go out of tune with each other, to take up a lot of room, to have phase problems, because these are longer waveforms, 50 hertz as compared to 5,000 hertz. 50 hertz is quite a bit longer if you were to go and measure the wavelength of that. So one of the reasons why you would use a filter on a delay is to cut out the lows from the delayed version, just keep everything clean, pristine, and clear. But you can also actually create more of a sense of space or distance if you use both of these filters in combination to basically create more of a bandpass filter. And this actually does have the effect of making the delay sound a little bit more distant. It's not as clear to hear. When you are talking to somebody and they're a foot away from you, and even in the case of something like this tutorial, if you have the volume up loud enough or even quiet enough, you'll hear my S's really kind of cutting through. You'll hear that sibilance. But if I was to move a lot farther away, Or if you were to move farther away from me, you wouldn't hear that detail as much. You'd probably still hear the main gist of what I'm saying. You'd understand what I'm saying, but the detail, especially in the low end and in the high end, starts to just kind of disappear and go away because it's not as important. So by using filters in combination with your delays, very easy to create a nice little sense of distance or space. And normally the delay is quieter than the original signal, so this would make a lot of sense. The other effect that you've heard countless times is the telephone delay. So again, you have more of a band pass. Sometimes you might use more of a vintage filter plugin to really get this effect, but same idea. You have the original, it sounds clean, clear, and then the delayed version sounds like you're talking through a telephone. So there's really nothing more complicated than that, and we'll set a couple of these guys up when we go into the example. The filter delay is by far the most common form of processing that you'll find partnered with delay. In fact, you find filtering partnered with virtually any effect quite a bit. So even if it's something like a chorus or a reverb, filtering is usually the go-to processing tool after one of these effects. So let's go ahead and set this up. We'll work with the vocal for this example. And we'll go in here and we'll just use the delay 1. And you can see that this delay 1 actually has filters already built in. So I'm just going to open them up for now in case yours doesn't and show you how you can get the same sort of effect and result. So we'll give this a little bit of feedback here just to make life a little more exciting for ourselves. And let's go and put this at a half note.
They are not there now. They are not there now. Morning on noon. Morning on noon. Not there.
So I'm going to go ahead and set a blend.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there. Not there. Not there.
And then I want to go and I want to apply the filtering. So I can do this in a couple of different ways. One way that all of you can definitely do this is if you have some kind of EQ plugin. So I'm going to apply this just to the delay chain. Very important. We are now processing just the delay. The dry signal is being left completely alone. I don't even need this tool device in here, but the delay is what we're working with. So I'll go ahead and solo that out. And it's going to take a little while for it to come in, that half note.
Morning on noon. Not there.
And let's just turn it up and then add our filters. So I'm going to go with the high pass and I'm going to go with the low pass. And we're just going to get a certain region in here. And you might do this for a variety of reasons. If we were using this type of delay on this synth part, which we'll do after, I'll go ahead and make sure that I just get rid of some of that low end, just so that I leaves that space. It's very much a solid image in the low end, which is what you'd probably want for a sound like this. In this example, we're using the filters more for like a telephone effect. So
they are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there. Not there.
So without the EQ,
they are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there.
And then with it,
they are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there.
And now we can set our blend.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there. Not there.
And it gives you the effect of it sounding a little bit more distant. That's really the main reason why you might use this. If you have some kind of specialty filter plugin, that also works great here. So I have this thing called the ladder, which is just a variety of different filters. I'll turn off all of this stuff and just focus on the filter itself. And I'll go and I'll choose something like a band pass. Okay, and the band pass is basically just the low pass and the high pass filters in combination, again, for that more telephone vintagey effect.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there. They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there.
We can try to steepen this by using the resonance.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there.
We could try this one.
They are not there now in the evening.
Nope, I prefer the steeper slopes. And then again, go in and set a balance.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there.
So definitely you get that kind of vintage telephony effect. We could actually take this even further, but since we're just focused on filters, that's the way to accomplish that. Let's do the same sort of setup here with this polysynth part. So we'll go in, we'll grab our delay. Go ahead and just set this to 100%. A little bit of feedback. And one great way to then eliminate some of that clashing that you're hearing is to use the filter. So let's just go and grab the EQ. And what we really want to do is make sure we don't have any of that low end overlapping. So I'd be pretty happy with that. So without it, especially in that second part, that's where you have some of the issues. And then with it, it also allows us to increase the feedback a little bit more. So there you have it. Filters and delay go together like peanut butter and jelly. Definitely experiment with that and you'll get the results that you're looking for with very little effort. Following up from filters, we move to equalizers, which are just more filters. So you can move beyond the filters or work in conjunction with them by adding some sort of EQ curve to your delays. This can really be done for 1,000 different reasons, and I'm not going to list all of the reasons you might do this, but really it just allows you to create more variation. You have that original signal, and now the delayed version sounds slightly different. Why it sounds slightly different is totally up to you. For whatever reason, I always find in a production, even if the delay is like a really hyped high end, it sounds better to me than if it was just a straight delay. I like that effect more. I like knowing that the delay is a little bit different from the original. And this is why you might go in and apply some kind of drastic EQ curve. You can get experimental here, or it can be very subtle. Absolutely up to you. And as I wrote here, you may do this just for the sake of variation. And in that case, the type of EQ you use does not matter. It could be any plugin. It could be vintage. It could be clean. It could be an emulation of something. Whatever the case may be, each instance or each different EQ you use will then go on to color that delay slightly differently. And that's really what this is all about. It's about creating that variation and really creating delays that are unique to you and to your sound. When it comes to combining delay with EQ, there are absolutely zero rules. You can get an incredibly wide array of different sounding delays by using EQ in conjunction. So whether you put that EQ at the start, at the end, doesn't matter. What type of EQ, doesn't matter. We'll be talking about coloring delays later on, and this kind of goes hand in hand if you're using more emulation style EQ plugins that color the sound just by inserting them. That's something you can go for, but we'll just keep it very simple in this example, and I'll leave it up to you to experiment because this is certainly one of those cases where you can experiment quite a bit. So in this example, why don't we just go with the other delay? Let's use the delay 2 just to keep things fresh and fun. And I'll just go in here. I added the wrong one, delay 2, and bring that mix up to 100%. Let's just take a quick listen.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Okay, cool. So we'll just go ahead and work with that as it is. We'll use these low cut and high cut settings as they are. So it is already adjusting things a little bit. And then after this delay, we'll go in and add an EQ and just do something wacky with it just for fun. So EQ 5, we'll bring this in after, again, just processing the delay.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So just like that, we have a very unique sounding delay.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And then if we want to, we could flip this around and go, okay, let's boost this way up and bring this way down. There are no rules. Don't think that because you see a crazy curve that you're doing something wrong. This is just about getting a different and interesting sound.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So easy, so simple to get a wide array of sounds. And depending on the context and what you're working on, you might find a number of reasons to add EQ. Maybe you're carving out space for something else that's playing at the same time. For example, if we were to have this over the synth part, maybe I want to cut out some space for the fundamental of that synth to continue to cut through and boost a different area that's going to then emphasize something about that delay or make it easier to hear. The sky's the limit. You just have to experiment and be willing to accept any wacky combination that you have, because it's about listening, not about seeing. Tape delay, or a pitch shifting delay, is something that's not as commonly used today as maybe it was in the past, in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, a very popular effect. Nowadays, the mixes in general tend to be a little bit more busy. There usually is a lot more instrumentation, and there's not as much room to put in a pitch shifting delay because of the problems it might cause harmonically with everything else that's going on. A lot of popular music nowadays really does just play by the rules in a very strict way, I guess because they know that that is something that works. It's catchy. It gets in people's head. It's kind of sad that we don't have as many tape delays used, but if you're making more experimental music, or you're willing to maybe have a little bit of that dissonance thrown in, by all means experiment with the tape delay. This can be difficult to set up if your plugin doesn't already offer it. So if it doesn't have like a detuning option, or it doesn't have a pitch shifting option, you might actually have to do a brute force approach. And there is always a way. On this website, I like to make it pretty clear that we can always get there. It might just take a few more steps. So we'll be going into the DAW using a built-in feature that comes with a delay, and then doing this manually so you can just hear how you can set this up and the variations you can get. And as I wrote here, in my opinion, if you actually go in and do this the brute force way, this effect may have more applications, because you can actually keep things always in tune if that's something that you're really worried about. So don't shy away from the tape delay just because you're worried about possible frequency clashes. It is possible to avoid that, a few more steps, but the payoff may be completely worth it. Unfortunately, I don't think there are any good free tape delay style plugins out there that work on both Mac and PC and are 64-bit compatible. So for that reason, we're going to be sticking more with just the idea of a pitch shifting delay, which in its history, in its homage, owes a lot to the classic tape delay. You don't hear this quite as frequently, and it's probably a reason why there's not a lot available out there. However, we're going to talk about a variety of different techniques that will allow you to pitch shift your delays, beginning with the Valhalla Freak Echo, which is something that we all have access to if you're on a 64-bit machine. So if I go in here, I can bring this up to 100%. We'll go ahead and put a sync value on for now, which I'm going to just go with a quarter note, and let's just set a blend here.
They are not there now in the evening, morning on morning, not there.
And the second I move this shift around, it's doing exactly what it says. It's actually repitching this delayed version by a value in hertz. So whatever we set, either all the way to 1,000 positive or 1,000 negative. So we can listen to this.
They are not there now in the evening, morning on morning, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning on morning, not there.
So you can hear how that works. And when this gets really interesting is when you actually start to automate this thing around a little bit and you get a little bit drastic with it.
They are not there now in the evening, morning on morning, not there.
That wasn't close to drastic enough. We'll go full-blown drastic on it.
They are not there now in the evening, morning on morning, not there.
So you can hear how that's working. It's a little bit more experimental, but it definitely is going to give you a lot of variety in your delays just by doing this shift value. The other option, if you want to get more of a repitching delay, is to actually automate the delay time itself. So if we go back to the old classic here, just the delay 1, bring this up to 100%, take a listen.
They are not there now in the evening, morning on morning, not there.
If we go into this manual setting for our delay,
they are not there now in the evening, morning on noon, not there.
You can hear how we're getting this repitching effect. And the way to do that is to just automate it. So what I'm going to do is at the very end on this last phrase, I'm going to increase this guy like drastically, just so you can really hear how this is working. All right, here we go. Let's take a listen from the beginning.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. Not there. Not there.
So you can hear how that's working, and that actually sounds a little bit more like a classic tape delay. But there is still sort of an issue with doing this, and a lot of it has to do with consistency and control. You have no idea where this is falling in terms of, actual melodic value. Like, what is this? Is this an A? Is it a B? Where is it exactly falling? And so if you want to get a little bit more fine-tuned control over your pitch shifting delays, the best way to do that is to actually bounce the delay and change the pitch manually. So this is the way that I like to do it if I need the effect. So in this example, I'm actually going to get rid of the delay here, and I'm going to create the parallel chain just because it's easier to understand everything that's happening. And on this parallel chain, I'm going to have the delay. So let me just rename this here quickly, and we'll go in and grab our delay, bring the mix value all the way to 100%. And I think just for the sake of it, I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to choose maybe a slightly longer time. So I'll choose a half note. And let's just quickly listen to these guys together.
They are not there now. They are not there now. Morning on noon. Morning on noon. Not there. Not there.
And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go in here. I'm just going to consolidate out this large block of space. And I'm going to bounce just the delay. Okay, so it's 100% wet, so you're not going to actually see signal until that half note kicks in. So we'll go and we will bounce this. And you can see that we now have the delay like so. And because it was a bounce, this is already stretched for me. So the fact that it's stretched means I can go in and I can repitch it. So I can get rid of this version.
They are not there now. They are not there now. Morning on noon. Morning on noon. Morning on noon. Not there.
And now I can go in here, and if I really want to get fancy, I can like block this out, and I could do it, in this kind of a fashion where each time it jumps to something new. But just for the sake of convenience, I'll just have this be dropping in pitch the whole time. Okay, and we'll add a little bit of a curve, and we can listen to this guy now.
They are not there now. They are not there now. Morning on noon. Morning on noon. Morning on noon. They are not there now in the evening. Morning on noon. Not there.
You go here, that's working. Or if I want to at the very end, like jump this up drastically, I could do that.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning or noon. Not there.
So that's actually the way that I tend to go about doing pitch shifting delays. And I actually enjoy doing it in like experimental music all the time. This is like a go-to technique. And so if you're able to bounce out and isolate that delay, you can go in and you can work with your regular pitch shifting tools and therefore create a pitch shifting delay. One thing I totally forgot to mention is that if you want to get some really extreme effects, you can go into the Valhalla freak echo, and you can actually modulate the delay time as well. And you can actually get a little bit of a smoother effect when modulating the delay sync value as compared to what I can at least do with my stock plugins. So if we combine this then with modulating this shift value, you can get some really diverse effects.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning or noon. Not there.
Something like that. And then we can go and adjust the shift and do something like this.
They are not there now in the evening. Morning or noon. Not there.
And so obviously a lot of fun, very simple, easy, and you can get some great sounding, unique delay effects. Back to our dear old friend, compression. And here's an example where signal flow really does matter, and you'll tend to, and this is not 100%, but you will tend to compress before you go into the delay. And the reason you might do that is, let's say that this is the sound that you're going to delay. I go like, ba, ba. So something very loud and then something very quiet. The delay is almost always quieter, and the feedback is getting quieter progressively as that delay is going away. So a problem with that very dynamic is that you might hear that loud part. But then that soft part, which you were able to hear in the actual composition itself, the dry part, you heard all of that detail. But then in the delay, you lose it because it's gotten so much quieter and gets buried in the mix. So if you compress pretty hard going into the delay and you have a signal that's a little bit more dynamic, like a lead signal, for example, if the synth is the loudest thing, you can get away with making it a fairly dynamic sound and it works pretty well. But then on the delay, it may cause some problems and you lose clarity on the delayed versions. So compressing on the way in guarantees that what comes out of the delay is evened out. So you could apply this type of compression after the delay, but you do run into the problem of then altering what's going on with those different repeats as they fade out. So you could try, and this is not something I'd recommend, but you could put a compressor after the delay, very fast attack, pretty long release time, and you can go in and you can actually just kind of isolate maybe the first two instances of feedback, and you compress those so they're getting quieter. Now when you bring up the overall signal, it means that delay instance number 3, delay instance number 4 is louder. So the fade of the delay and of the repeats is actually being lessened. So that might be something you try. However, if you want that effect, it makes a lot more sense to work with a tap delay where you can actually control the volume level of each delay independently. So you could actually have the first instance be quieter than the second instance if you wanted. With traditional delay, it doesn't work that way unless you set up like a volume automation, or you could try some kind of extreme compression. Again, I don't really recommend going that direction because it then sort of even throws off the whole reason of why you'd be using the traditional delay in the first place. The other effect, very common post-delay, sidechain compressing the delayed signal to something else you have going on in the production. We've talked about sidechain compressing the reverb. We talked about gating the reverb. Same sort of things can be used here with delay. So as I wrote, regular logic applies. A lot of times people make a really big deal about where a compressor is placed in a signal flow, and the common question you read online is, where should you put your compressor before or after an EQ? You know, it's more of a mixing question. And the answer to that is if you're asking the question, it probably doesn't matter that much because you may not fully understand what you're doing with your compressor. And really, in my opinion, before or after an EQ, it's such a subtle thing, and it's a reason why it continues to get so many questions and nobody can really give a definitive answer, because there is no best answer. And even if you come up with what in theory makes the most sense, you can always compensate after the compression. For example, like if you go with the traditional, do your cut EQ first, followed by compression, followed by a boost EQ, well, you can always still cut frequencies after the compressor. So is it really making that big of a difference? For some people, it seems to make a huge difference. For others, it's really not so big of a deal. The reason I start with that maybe unrelated tangent is because in the case of reverb and delay, where you put your compressor really does make a difference. It makes a significant difference, something that you'll be able to audibly hear immediately. So we've slightly changed this audio clip here so it sounds like this.
They are not there now in the evening.
So it's maybe a little bit silly, that drastic cut, but if we imagine that this is an instrument sound, for example, there might be parts where the dynamic shifts a lot. And if it's a piano performance and the piano is the loudest thing in the mix relative, you can leave a lot of varying dynamic and everything is still heard clearly. But when the delay is in the background, you might lose that quieter part. And that's not what you want. You want to make sure that you can hear all of that delay. Otherwise, it sounds a little bit weird and it doesn't sound like a full delay of the signal, especially if that's what you're anticipating. It's always fine to mess with anticipation, but just in case you don't want to do that, here's what you might want to consider doing. So I'll go ahead and just use this compressor plugin here. It really doesn't make a big difference. And I'm putting it before the delay because if I go after the delay, I could potentially be messing with the natural fade out of that delay if there's a lot of feedback. And in this example, we'll use a lot of feedback. So I'm going to compress this relatively hard so that I get an evened out version of this signal. So let's just go ahead and do that.
They are not there now in the evening. 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 They are not there now in the evening.
So this should be getting me a little bit closer. I'm just going to increase this ratio to about 4:1.
They are not there now in the evening.
And now if I listen to it off,
They are not there now in the evening.
and then turn it back on, we should hear how it's totally leveled out.
They are not there now in the evening.
And that's good enough for me. So after the compressor, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to put on the delay. And for the sake of simplicity, we'll just work with the delay 1. Have the feedback boosted. Again, we want this mix to be 100%. Let's go with a half note here, and we'll use a little bit of filtering. And let's just take a listen to this.
They are not there now.
They are not there now in the evening.
And then let's try turning off the compressor and just hear what happens.
They are not there now.
They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not there.
So you can hear how it's always getting quieter in that second half. Not a big deal out of context, but if there was a lot of instrumentation going on, you might lose it. And even as we start to get the right blend,
They are not there now
They
in
are
the
not
evening.
there now. They are not there now. They are not there now.
that's a bit of a jolt. So with this on,
They are not there now
They
in
are
the
not
evening.
there now. They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not.
I definitely prefer the version with the compressor at the start of this, and this is actually a fairly common technique that's used. The danger of putting this after the delay is that we start to mess with multiple instances of the feedback so that we're not getting a natural decay like we're having right now. So we can just try this here and see what happens. It may not be a big deal. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it is.
They are not there now
They
in
are
the
not
evening.
there now. They are not 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 there now.
So it just doesn't work the same way. You could see what was going on there. You could even hear it that after it gets through the first couple of times, that little cut at the end is still happening, and it's actually going to make it fade out almost quicker. So this would be the way to work with this, in my opinion. Remember that if for some reason you do want to alter what the level is of your different repeats, that would be the time to work with the tap delay. Because with the tap delay, I can so easily go in here and just have like the second or third repeat be louder if I needed it to be. So let's imagine that we have a quarter note, okay, we have an eighth note, and then we have a whole note here. And I'll just turn each of these guys on to full power and make sure that we have no additional feedback going in. We'll just leave this as is, but I can of course go in here now and make it so that that final repeat is actually the loudest thing that's happening. So something like this should work fine. 100% wet.
They are not there now in the evening. They are not there now in the evening.
So let's make this even a little bit more varied. Let's turn this up so that we can really hear it.
They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not there now in the evening.
So you can hear how this last one's the loudest, and then we add a little pan action.
They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not there now in the evening.
And you would really probably think that we'd actually just duplicated this. But what's so cool is that on that final one, it's actually coming out just louder in general because we now have that compressed version coming in. So just listen one more time, really listen to the original versus that final delay.
They are not there now. They are not there now. They are not there now in the evening.
Pretty cool. I bet you never thought that you could set something up like that so easily, but definitely a fun technique to experiment with. And again, this is something that's used quite frequently with delay. This is the most common application of pairing a compressor and a delay. The other technique we're all very familiar with by now is sidechain compressing after the delay based on some sort of trigger. So in this example, it's just going to be more of the classic kick drum. And in this case, with the sound that we have coming out of the polysynth, there's no changes in velocity here at all. So it really doesn't make a difference for us, and it wouldn't make sense to put a compressor before because that sound is what it is, right? I mean, it's not varying at all. We're going to get something even coming out of the delay no matter what. However, we might run into some problems where the feedback of the delay is interfering with the kick, and it's probably not really going to be interfering with the kick. It's just a matter of using this as kind of a specialty effect. So let's just set it up quickly because we're all familiar with what's going on here. And I'm going to go in and I'm just going to grab my delay 1 again, or maybe in this example, we can use the delay 2, get a little bit more action happening, make it more fun. And we'll quickly set something up. Cool, so this will work absolutely perfectly, and we'll bring in the kick drum as well now. So I'm going to bring the delay up just a little bit more so that we can really get the impact of sidechaining the delay to the kick. And remember, we're doing this specifically on the delay. So the dry signal is not being sidechain compressed, only the delays. That's what kind of makes this fun and unique. So I'll grab the dynamics device, put this after the delay, keep it on to just this chain, go in here for my sidechain, go to the kick, choose kick post or kick pre, whatever, and just start going to work on this. So now you're starting to hear it. Next, I'm going to choose pre so that we can hear what's happening, even if we just solo out this delay part. And then we'll do it with the dynamics off. And this can start to get really fun when you decide to only put the reverb onto the delay. So if I go delay, follow it up with a reverb, and we'll just use the stock one here. Cool, I'm definitely digging that. Again, we can turn the dynamics off. Hear it. And then with it on. Nice. This is almost an example where it might be more fun to have the delay even be louder than the dry signal. So not something you would do every day, but another very common technique and something that you find in most of the fancier delay plugins is the ability to saturate your delays or even just color them. Sometimes that's done to emulate a hardware device, or sometimes it's just done for variation. But this is a technique that's done all the time with delays, and this is part of how you can get more of that vintage sound. So adding any kind of distortion, saturation, or coloring device, and we'll talk about what defines a coloring device in the example, to your delay creates those subtle sonic variations that we've become very much accustomed to in a lot of the music we listen to and a lot of the delays that we hear. This is one step in helping you achieve the vintage sound, if that's something that you're going for. This is an area where you should experiment with all the plugins you have. And what you'll end up doing is developing kind of your own set of go-to saturation or color or distortion effects that work really well with the delay. So something that you will want to experiment with fully. Now, when overdriven, saturation and distortion are dynamic effects, so you may want to experiment with signal flow. If you have that distortion post-delay, and for the first repeat, it's driven in really hard, you will hear more distortion and saturation on the earlier delays. And then as it's fading out, you get less and less and less because it's not overdriving anymore. The input signal isn't coming in as hot. So if you want it to be consistent, you would put that distortion or saturation before going into the delay. If you want it varied, which is also fantastic, you would go in and you would put it after. So something we'll listen to and talk about further in the example. Especially with saturation, you need to think and know, does my saturator actually compress the signal And in a lot of cases, it actually does. That's kind of what saturation or distortion is. It gets overdriven and then it clamps down on the signal. But when it clamps down, it actually adds overtones, adds harmonics as compared to the clean types of compression that we just looked at before, where we're not really trying to change the overall color or sound of the signal. So if that's the case, you really need to think about the signal flow and whether or not you want it to come before or after. And if it's something like a saturation, I like to do it before the delay, mainly because I want that delay to then be consistent. If you want it to be inconsistent, you can always go after the fact. And so with each additional delay, what's going to end up happening is you hear less and less of that distortion because it's not overdriving as much. I'll leave that up to you to experiment with. I'm just going to stick to pre-delay here. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab something that's pretty aggressive, I would say, this Fuzz Plus 3, which is a free plugin here. And right now we pretty much just have a parallel setup where we have the dry version and then we have this distorted version. But I'm not necessarily going to be going 100% here, mainly because the delay is what's responsible for 100%. So this isn't your classic parallel configuration, but it's going to turn into that very shortly. So I'm just going to actually solo out this version and get a sound I like. And when you see squaring out of the waveform like you see here, that's a telltale sign that you're actually getting some form of compression or dynamic shaping in addition to just the coloration. Okay, so I like that. That's going to be the basis for my delay, and I'm also actually going to want to make this delay to be mono. So the main signal is actually pretty stereo, but I can just bring this down and make it mono here. And also do some signal flow adjustments. Cool. Maybe I'll give it a little bit of stereo width. And now we're going to go in and bring in the delay, which is actually going to now make this the delay effect. Bring that to 100%. I'll open up the filters. I might work with this low cut a little bit, but since this already does have a high cut filter in it, no reason for me to, double dip on that unless I really saw fit. All right, so let's see if we can get something we like. There we go. So that's a little bit better. That's something more like I like. There we go. You could always experiment with putting it on the other side, but I do prefer doing it this way. So we can now get rid of these guys and just listen to the clean delay. And then what happens when we bring in this Fuzz Plus. And that was pretty extreme what we had set up, so we can make it a little less extreme and obviously set that just to taste. This is, of course, just an example. You'll spend a lot more time getting it the way you want it to be. But there's so many other devices that you can use here. I could go in and just use a regular old distortion that's built into this particular program if I wanted to do that. This one does give me a dedicated width control, so that's nice. So that sounds pretty cool. But the other thing we can do is get a little bit more fancy and start talking about what I would call the coloration devices. And coloration effects are really things like specifically Nebula, which is a very difficult little plugin to understand, but I'll just set it up for you so you can see it. With the second course, we do actually have bonus videos that do cover how to work with Nebula completely, but I'll just quickly walk through it with you here. So with Nebula, what you really want first and foremost is to get the signal flow right, and to do that you have to use, or you should use, I should say, a metering tool that's going to give you more of a what is the word, VU meter type look, and have it calibrated to -18. And this is actually pretty good. I can turn things down a little bit. So that should work quite nicely. And then from there, I can go and I can drop on my instance of Nebula. So Nebula 3, the reverb version is the newer version. This is the one that you should probably go with all the time. And I'm going to use this as a coloring device. So I'm going to find a program that I like. And I'm going to use something like one of these EQs that has a lot of color to it. So you can hear what that's actually doing. And I can take it off. Let's just like drive some gain in here. Very cool effect. And then I'm going to again go in and grab a width control. So it can be fairly subtle, but you're not necessarily going for extremes here. And I'm definitely going to end up liking the way that this sounds after the fact when I bring this back in. So there it is without and then with. We can always try to load up something else as well. See if there's some kind of preamp on here. And the actual thing with this that's kind of weird is if I see the econo, this actually does mean that I'm on the normal mode. So it's the inverse of what you would normally think. But that's why we're getting a little bit more of that distortion coming through from this preamp. So these are very subtle, very small little coloration effects, but this is actually one of the features of kind of a lot of the fancy delays, is that they'll give you a lot of different saturators or color options, and you really just don't necessarily need that because there are so many plugins out there that just give you a nice variety of flavors of distortion to begin with. We can go in here to the free fuzz and we can mess around with that a little bit. We just try some of the other models. All right, that one's incredibly aggressive. Let's use that one. So there really are just a wide range of things you can experiment with and try. I recommend going as deep as you possibly can. So sometimes those effects, like you saw with Nebula, which is more of a coloring device, can be very subtle. To the untrained ear, you may not really be able to hear the difference, but if you use a slightly different preamp on each of your delays, for example, it actually does get that variation to the listener, which is somewhat subconscious. You don't even necessarily know it's there, but it's there, and you can tell when you then get rid of it and take it away. So experiment, try out all the different saturators amplifiers and color devices you have, because this is really sort of a great way to start getting a little bit more of maybe that vintage delay sound if that's something that you want to go for. Spatial and special effects, again, very common with delay. You can use any other effects to process your delays. Sky's the limit here. Popular options include a chorus, things like dimension expanders, early reflections of a reverb, reverb itself, etc. You can do whatever you want with these delays to color them. Like I talked about with the Grand Canyon, if you scream into the Grand Canyon and you want that delay effect in your DAW, you're going to have to add quite a bit of reverb just to the delays. Is there anything wrong with doing that? Absolutely not. You should experiment. You should come up with those unique signal flows and chains that work for you. Depending on the context, you might want a dedicated width control following the effects you use, because once you start to put on choruses, dimension expanders, and so forth, you can really get a very wide signal on the delay, something very popular that you've heard. But another popular thing is if you actually have a signal that's in stereo to make the delay mono. So you can still apply choruses and other spatial effects, and they do color the sound and change the way that you hear it, but then you might want to have some kind of a width control on the tail end there to balance everything out and maybe either put that delay into mono or put it out into hyper stereo. Completely up to you. Experiment with everything you have. There are no rules. The wackier effects, the more variation and contrast you'll be able to achieve based on the original signal to the delayed version. And that's something that I do a lot of times, where I actually make the delay sound completely different to the original. And so there's still that somewhat of familiarity. You can still recognize that these sounds are related, but you don't know how. So it's a great way, especially on percussion sounds, to give yourself that extra layer, and it's delaying at an appropriate time, so something rhythmically relevant. And that is just a great way to add a new part, something that's related but still sounds different. So if you get stuck, you can't figure out the next sound, why not try taking a sound you already have and just delaying it? And then, process the crap out of it, create something brand new and something that will hopefully work in context. We're now really at the point in this tutorial where it's time to just take everything else you have and throw it at the wall and see what actually sticks. So spatial effects on delay is a very common way of getting that additional bit of separation. So if you have a signal, for example, that's in mono here.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And you want to get the delay to be, a little bit more spacious, kind of like if it was real life. If somebody is talking right at you, 2 feet away, that initial sound that you're going to hear is going to be very much direct. It's going to feel very mono. But if you're in a very large space, if you're in a cave, you'll then hear those reflections bouncing off the wall, and they'll come back at you, much wider, all over the place, more of a stereo-esque effect. And we can accomplish the same basic sort of thing here inside of the digital audio workstation, either by using multiple delays or processing a very simple delay, which is what we're going to do here. So again, I bring this in. We'll use a little bit of filtering. Let's put this time to something like half notes.
They are not there now. They are not there now. Morning or noon. Morning or noon. Morning or noon. Morning or noon.
So I want to take this delay sound and I want to actually kind of widen it, give it a little bit of space. And I can use a lot of effects to do that. One effect that's very classic is to use something like a chorus. So if this comes in now.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
You can hear how it just immediately widens things out.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So very simple, straightforward, something anybody can do, just drag and drop and you've got it. You can use some more specialty effects as well. For example, something like the dimension expander, which is a free plugin. We can mess around with this for our delay.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
I'll just turn things up just so that you can hear it a little bit better.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And if you want to combine this with reverb or even just use early reflections of a reverb, you can absolutely do that too. So we'll bring in this reverb. I'm going to start by turning off the dimension expander.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So that works great. We can also just emphasize early reflections, bring the early late all the way down.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
This is a very fun effect.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
And then we can start to bring in just a little bit of those later reflections.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And remember, take that pre-delay all the way down to 0 if you're going to be processing the delays. So
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
let's see if we can widen this out even further using the dimension expander.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon.
Not having that big of an impact, mainly because this dimension expander is a lot like just working with early reflections of a reverb. So that's something you can do, very consistently done across a lot of genres of music, especially if you have a signal that's maybe mono. The other thing you can do is perhaps a little bit more experimental. So this would be kind of using a delay to create almost a completely new part. So we have our polysynth here that we're all familiar with. After this video is over, you're going to hate this pattern for the rest of your life. We go in and we add a delay, and I'm not sure what delay time I want just yet, but we'll figure it out. And again, we'll use something maybe this time a little bit more complex to make it a little bit more interesting. And I'm not too concerned about what the timings are here because we're going to really turn this into something totally different in a second. Okay, cool. I'm going to try to get a decent amount of feedback here as well. Cut a little bit more of the low end. And now we're going to absolutely transform this thing. And the way I'm going to do that is by taking a reverb. And I'm just going to crank up this reverb time and also the mix value. Let's take an EQ as well. You can modulate something like that. That would be a lot of fun. So you know in a way that it has to be related to this signal, but you're not exactly sure how. So if you need some kind of underlying texture or something to even just spruce things up ever so slightly, you can create something like this, put it way in the background and just have it there as an element that's helping to really maybe bring everything together. That's kind of the point of this. But again, I recommend that you go in, mess around with all the additional effects that you haven't tried on delay, and see if you can find a really awesome chain that's going to end up being unique to you. Needless to say, you will be combining a lot of these effects and techniques. Find a unique processing chain for delay, save it as a preset, and reuse it. Creating these delay presets is one way that I think will help you define your sound. You have that unique delay that nobody else has, and that becomes kind of a staple or a trademark in your productions. Great way to kind of say, hey, this is me as a producer. So definitely something to think about. Not a requirement by any stretch of the imagination, but if you are worried about having that consistent sound as a producer, this is certainly one way to help you achieve that. This is probably the one and only DAW specific slide that we're covering throughout this entire tutorial, and it involves using macros. So only a handful of DAWs have macros. Some plugins like Guitar Rig have macros, and really all they allow you to do is map a knob, this kind of just free-floating knob, to any parameter in any sort of plugin that belongs to the chain. And so you could have a macro that's controlling the dry wet of a chorus, but it's also controlling the mid-band of an EQ. It's also controlling a filter. So a macro can be set up to move a lot of parameters all at the same time. And if you're going to be saving delay presets and you have these long and complex signal flow chains, having the ability to go in and map a few settings to macros is really worth the time and the effort, because it allows you to get variation in your delays in a snap of a finger or in the turn of a single knob. So you can set up a delay chain with a lot of effects and control the amount of each effect from the macro. So you might have a chorus, you might have a flanger, and a phaser. And each of those is on its own macro, and you have the dry-wet balance for each of those sets. So maybe one time you want the delay to be flanged. In a different application, you load up the preset and you want it to have a chorus effect built in. This can allow you to create just a couple of what I'd call power delay presets, which you can go to time and time again, and then just tweak the macros to taste to get yourself even more variation out of those delays. So if your DAW does have macros, or you have a plugin that allows for macro usage, I highly recommend experimenting with that, because it's just a great way to quickly drop in a preset and then be able to turn a few knobs and get a totally new and different effect. As was mentioned in the previous slide, not all DAWs have macro controls, so I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. But if you have macros built into your DAW, or if you own something like Guitar Rig, it's definitely worth experimenting with, because once you set up macros, you really can get an endless array of delay effects, all with just turning a few knobs. So let's set one of those up here. And in this case, I'm going to actually start with what's called a chain. And the reason I'm starting with this chain is because everything I bundle inside of here, I can control from macros at this point. I could also open this up and control all the macros from here. The reason I wouldn't do that is because I can't as easily then just go and save this chain. This would include the layer, a dry version, and a delayed version, which might be something I want, but I'm going to stick to just this chain here to make our lives a little bit easier. So this is still going to be the delay, and the first thing I'm going to put in is going to be the delay. So maybe this time, I don't know, we'll work with the delay 4 since we just haven't really done a whole lot with it. Put that into the chain. This mixes 100%, but more important that this mixes at 100%. In fact, both would have to be at 100%. And now we should have the delay going.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
Cool, and I could even go, and believe it or not, I could map the delay time. So this is currently at 16th note, which is the fastest that it has here by default, but I could actually add this in, and I bring it all the way up, so I should get all of it. So this is just going to be called delay time. That's really annoying. Delay time. And now if I play this back,
they are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
And let's say, I want something that's going to be a little bit slower. I could bring this up.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
You can see we now have some setting. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but it's definitely something. You're going to have to just kind of listen and get a feel for it. But that would definitely work really well. Let's also add in a second version here. This one will pan off to slightly to the left. This one will pan off slightly to the right, make it a little bit quieter. And by default, have this be at a quarter note just to start. And then we'll actually map the same thing over. And now they should move in conjunction.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So that's cool. And I could also then route something to feedback, okay? So if I want to have more than just one repeat, I can go in, I could map that to the feedback here, and also to number 2 feedback here, and we'll try to get them to be the same. So this is at 0.6 roughly. We'll try to get the same thing here, 0.6. In and about. Cool. So this is going to be feedback.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So we're getting a little bit of extra feedback. We could take this up even higher if we wanted, and you can see how those are changing accordingly. So we'll put it somewhere towards the middle. Maybe we will just go ahead and bring this up even a bit more. The one thing you have to be careful about is going all the way up to the top, because then you can start to get a feedback chain where the feedback just starts to go back on itself again and again, and then it won't stop. So always be careful of that with delay. We've avoided it up till now. So we could also go and add a few different effects here to this. We could add, the chorus effect, for example. Maybe we could add a distortion. And we'll add one additional thing, something maybe a bit different. We'll add the comb. And now with the macros, and I'm going to close down this delay just so I can see everything, I can, set things even just as simple as the mix controls for this. So if I want to bring in chorus, I can bring in a decent amount of chorus. And you can get much more experimental. Like this could also be routed to something like the drive, even though you're not necessarily going to know that, but it is being routed to the drive as well. We could go and set this one to be the mix of the distortion. And then the last one is the comb, and we'll again have a few different things actually be adjusting that. I'm going to use the chorus to adjust the frequency going up, and I'm going to use the distortion to actually have the frequency going down. I'll leave the feedback where it is, and then I will have a dedicated mix control down here. So that's the comb. And probably a reverb wouldn't be a bad idea either. We'll put the reverb at the very end. If I can remember how to spell, that always helps. And bring this mix down, just increase the time a little bit. We're not really going for anything here. Yeah, cool. So then go and have this be the verb. So what we've now created is a very complicated delay. And I can use and I can control all of these things just from the macros. So if we start playing back, I can try to find something that works quite nice.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So that would be one thing I could create, but I could just as easily go in and create something totally different.
They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there. They are not there now in the evening, morning or noon, not there.
So with just a few turns of a few macro knobs, I have just an endless array of delay effect possibilities all saved within here. And if I wanted to go in and then save the preset, I could just save it as something like Brian Delay 1, category. We can put it right into delay there, add some tags if we wanted, but we'll call this Brian Delay macros. I probably have something called Brian Delay. So we could save it. We could then find it in the user library and drag and drop it into a number of different projects. And right there, we have a variety of settings that we can alter to get as many different delay processing chains as really you can imagine. One thing we haven't covered in this tutorial is automation. Believe it or not, automation is really a huge part of delay processing that will open up another whole new world of sonic possibilities, especially when it comes to variation. Imagine automating a parameter on one of your macros over time. Now each delay sound is completely different and it's changing in time. Very cool idea, something that will keep a listener very interested, especially if they're listening closely. There are some songs that I've heard where even each time like the vocal is delayed, like it's delay throw, so it's important words of the vocal, the delay is different every time. Even if it's just subtly, it is different. And when you're listening closely, you really pick up on that. And when you're kind of not listening closely, it's something that I believe you are perceiving and keeping you interested in the song, even though you're not able to maybe pinpoint or pick out exactly what it is that's changing. Sometimes it's these subtle delays that are changing in the background and are really keeping you interested in the song. You're hearing a variation where you normally aren't expecting a variation to be, because yeah, a pop song, a chorus 5 times it can start to get boring. So you need to figure out ways to add variation that's not extreme. So by changing delays, great way to do that, and using automation is a simple but effective means to that end. In our next tutorial, which is all about delay throws, we will spend a lot of time discussing automating parameters in your delay processing chain, but many of those ideas, which we will cover next week, can be applied to your regular delays, what we're talking about this week. So be sure to watch next week and combine some of those techniques with what we've talked about here. This is really in a lot of ways like part 1 of 2 when it comes to us talking about delay processing. So to wrap things up, delay processing is a useful technique in all types of music, and even if you don't think it's relevant to the music you make, you should experiment with it anyway. As long as you have a reason, there are no rules. Just mess around, see what you get. Subtle variation or extreme contrast? What do you want to go for? Well, it's entirely up to you. You can do both. Take these ideas and push them further. Everything I try to bring to you guys here on Sormena, I want you to take, I want you to use, but I want you to push even further. I'm certainly not the most creative music producer on the planet, so some of these ideas can be warped and manipulated, and really you can do some amazing things with these ideas when you push them further, things that I would have never considered or thought about doing. So I definitely recommend that you do that, you have some fun, and you open up a whole new world of delay processing.